Robert Wilson's hands trembled as he stared at the bank statement, the numbers blurring through his tears. $75,000, Emma's college fund, reduced to zero. The kitchen's familiar scent of coffee now turned bitter as salt tears splashed onto the paper. 30 years of marriage, and Caroline had authorized the withdrawal without a word. His gaze drifted to the refrigerator, where Emma's straight-A report card hung proudly. At 12, she was already dreaming of Harvard. Now, those dreams were evaporating like the steam from his untouched coffee. Has betrayal ever knocked the wind from your lungs? Share your story below, like if this hits home, and follow to see how Robert and his daughter fight back against a calculated betrayal no one saw coming. The grandfather clock, Caroline's family heirloom, ticked accusingly in the silence as Robert noticed her missing car keys. Something inside him knew. This was just the beginning. Robert Wilson settled into his leather chair, the familiar creak a small comfort as he opened his laptop for the evening financial review. 30 years of habit. Check the accounts, adjust as needed. Ensure Emma's future remained secure. The faint scent of Caroline's lavender candle lingered in his home office, mixing with the cooling coffee at his elbow. The notification appeared immediately. Unusual withdrawal from Emma's college fund account. His finger hesitated over the trackpad, a slight tremor he hadn't noticed before. Must be nothing. Caroline probably moved some investments, but the tightness in his chest suggested otherwise. One click revealed the truth. $75,000. Gone. Robert's reading glasses slipped down his nose as he leaned closer to the screen, as if proximity might change the numbers glowing back at him. The grandfather clock in the hallway, Caroline's family heirloom, ticked with sudden accusation. "No," he whispered, voice catching on the single syllable. His hand reached for the phone, movements automatic after decades in IT security. The bank representative's voice became a distant buzz as words like authorized withdrawal and joint account holder filtered through the roaring in his ears. "Your wife completed the transaction yesterday, Mr. Wilson." Yesterday, while he'd been helping Emma with her science project. While they'd laughed together at the kitchen table, Caroline had been. The framed photo of Emma's middle school award ceremony caught his eye. His little girl, already dreaming of Harvard. Robert's vision blurred, the first hot tear slipping down his cheek before he even registered its formation. He set the phone down without ending the call. The house's silence pressed against him as he lifted the photo, thumb brushing over Emma's proud smile. All those years of careful planning, the extra consulting jobs he'd taken after retirement, the budget adjustments when inflation hit, all to secure her future. Not her money, our daughter's future. Another tear fell, landing on the glass with a soft pat. Robert removed his glasses, pressing the heel of his hand against his eyes. The pressure built in his chest, rising up his throat until a single broken sob escaped. He hadn't cried since his father died 15 years ago. The bank representative's tinny voice called from the abandoned phone. "Mr. Wilson, are you still there? There's another pending transfer scheduled for tomorrow morning." Robert straightened, years of professional crisis management asserting themselves through the shock. Another transfer. He retrieved the phone, voice steadier than he felt. "Place a hold on all our accounts immediately." As he ended the call, his gaze caught on something odd, Caroline's handwriting on yesterday's mail stack. An envelope he hadn't noticed, partially hidden beneath bills. His fingers, still trembling, reached for it. A soft knock at the door interrupted his movement. Robert froze, tears still wet on his cheeks. Who would be visiting at this hour? Robert quickly wiped his face with his handkerchief, years of professional composure taking over despite the tremor in his hands. The knock came again, more insistent. He slipped the mysterious envelope into his desk drawer before crossing to the door. "Evening, Bob." Walter Gaines, his neighbor of 15 years, stood on the porch, holding a casserole dish. "Sarah made too much lasagna again. Thought you folks might—" Walter paused, eyes narrowing at Robert's face. "Everything all right?" "Fine," Robert said, the word catching slightly. "Just some work stress." The lie felt strange on his tongue. He and Caroline had always been close with the Gaineses, Friday dinners, shared vacations, Walter and him watching football while the women chatted in the kitchen. Now those memories carried a bitter aftertaste. "Where's Caroline tonight?" Walter asked, peering past Robert into the quiet house. "Working late." The same explanation she'd given him the past 3 Tuesdays, the same lie he was now passing along. After Walter left, reluctance evident in his lingering glance, Robert returned to his office. The lasagna sat untouched on the counter. His appetite had vanished with those zeros on the screen. The envelope beckoned from the drawer. Robert pulled it out, studying the familiar, elegant script of his wife's handwriting. Addressed to the mortgage company, not yet mailed. Why would Caroline be writing to them? Their house was paid off 5 years ago, a point of pride they'd celebrated with champagne on the back porch. His security consultant's instincts, dulled by retirement but never extinguished, flared to life. He carefully opened the envelope, sliding out a single page. Request for equity line of credit. Caroline's signature, and a forgery of his own. The room tilted slightly. Robert gripped the edge of his desk, another tear escaping before he could stop it. His reflection in the darkened window looked older, the lines around his mouth deeper than they'd been that morning. 30 years of marriage. 30 years. And he'd never once questioned her trustworthiness. Robert turned to the computer, methodically checking their other accounts. Credit card statements revealed hotel charges in the next town over. Restaurant bills for 2 at places they'd never visited together. A passport application fee from last month. Caroline already had a passport. They'd gone to London for their 25th anniversary. Each discovery was a physical blow, his chest tightening until breathing became difficult. He picked up a framed photo from his desk. Caroline and him on that London trip, smiling, her head resting on his shoulder. With a sudden, uncharacteristic burst of anger, he slammed it face down. The sound echoed in the empty house. Taking a deep breath, Robert straightened his shoulders and reached for his old work notebook. Decades of investigating digital security breaches had taught him to be methodical, even when the breach was in his own home. If Caroline was planning something, there would be more evidence. His hand hovered over his phone, Emma's contact displayed on screen. His daughter was at a friend's house for a sleepover, blissfully unaware that her future was crumbling. Not yet. He couldn't tell her yet. Not until he knew everything. A text notification lit up his phone. Caroline. Working late again. Don't wait up. Robert's fingers tightened around the device as his gaze moved to the credit card statement showing tonight's dinner for 2 at Le Jardin. Where are you really, Caroline? He whispered to the empty room. The digital clock on Robert's desk marked midnight as he sat motionless, surrounded by the debris of his investigation. Credit card statements, account printouts, and his meticulous notes covered every surface of his office. The evidence was overwhelming, yet some part of him still searched for an innocent explanation. Perhaps Caroline was planning a surprise. Perhaps there was a family emergency she hadn't shared. Perhaps... no. The logical part of his brain, the part that had made him an excellent security consultant, refused to indulge these fantasies. The pattern was too clear, the deception too calculated. Robert pushed back from his desk, the chair wheels whispering against the hardwood floor. If Caroline wasn't coming home tonight, he had an opportunity he couldn't waste. Her home office was at the opposite end of the hall, a space he rarely entered out of respect for her privacy. The irony of that respect now stung like salt in an open wound. The door opened silently, moonlight spilling through the blinds to illuminate her orderly desk. Unlike his workspace, Caroline's was minimalist: a computer, a few framed photos, and a small desk organizer. Robert had always admired her ability to maintain order, while his own space accumulated the comfortable clutter of projects and memories. He hesitated, hand hovering over her desk drawer. This was the point of no return. Once he searched her private space, something fundamental would change between them, even if his suspicions proved unfounded. But $75,000 of their daughter's future had already disappeared. The drawer slid open smoothly. Inside, a small keyed lockbox sat nestled among office supplies. And Robert recognized it. A Christmas gift from him 3 years ago, intended for important documents. The key, he knew, was kept in a small ceramic dish on her bookshelf, another gift from Emma's pottery phase. His hands trembled as he retrieved the key and opened the box. Inside lay a folder containing what appeared to be property listings: condominiums in Florida, beach houses in South Carolina, all well outside their agreed retirement budget. Beneath the listings, he found something worse: love letters, written in Caroline's distinctive handwriting, addressed to "My dearest Julia." Julia. The name struck a vague chord. Caroline's new friend from her volunteer work at the community center, the one she'd mentioned increasingly over the past few months. The letters detailed plans for their future together. Plans that used phrases like "once we're free" and "after we secure our funding." Plans that explicitly mentioned Emma's college fund as the first step. A sound escaped Robert's throat, something between a gasp and a sob. He clutched the edge of Caroline's desk as the room seemed to swim around him. 30 years of marriage reduced to securing funding for an escape. As he shuffled through the papers with numb fingers, a brochure for an international bank caught his eye. An account opening form was paper-clipped to it, partially completed in Caroline's handwriting. An offshore account, beyond the reach of U.S. financial regulations, beyond his reach when he discovered the theft. Robert sank into Caroline's chair, the letters clutched in his hand, as the full scale of the betrayal crashed over him. Not just an affair, a calculated long-term plan to take everything they'd built together and disappear. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 1, its familiar chime now a mockery of the time they'd shared in this house. Robert looked up at the family photos on Caroline's wall, holidays, vacations, Emma's birthdays, and wondered if any of it had been real. His security training had taught him to identify threats, strengthen vulnerabilities, and protect what mattered. But he'd never thought to protect his family from within. A car's headlights swept across the window as a vehicle pulled into their driveway. Robert froze, the letters still in his hand, as the sound of a car door closing broke the night silence. Caroline was home. Robert's training took over. Quickly, methodically, he returned the letters to the lockbox, the key to its dish, and slipped out of Caroline's office. By the time the front door opened, he was back in his own space, seated at his desk with a spreadsheet open on his screen. The evidence of his investigation had been hastily tucked into a drawer. "You're still up." Caroline's voice carried a hint of surprise. She stood in his doorway, elegant in a dress he didn't recognize, her perfume unfamiliar and too strong. "Working on a consulting proposal," he replied, the lie coming easier than he expected. "How was your late meeting?" "Productive." She didn't elaborate. "I'm exhausted. Don't stay up too late." Robert watched her retreat down the hallway, cataloging the subtle differences in her behavior. No kiss on his cheek, no details about her day, no questions about his. Small changes that he'd attributed to the natural evolution of a long marriage, now revealed as symptoms of its dissolution. Sleep evaded him entirely. He lay on his side of their bed, listening to Caroline's measured breathing, wondering how many nights she'd lain beside him planning her escape. When morning light filtered through the curtains, he rose quietly, moving through his routine like an automaton. Caroline was already gone when Emma returned from her sleepover, bright-eyed and chattering about her friend's new puppy. Robert smiled and nodded, heartbreaking at the knowledge of what was coming. How could he tell his daughter that her mother was stealing her future? The day passed in a fog of normalcy. Robert made lunch, helped Emma with homework, and waited. Caroline texted that she would be home for dinner, a family meal, something increasingly rare in recent months. The table was set, Emma's favorite pasta prepared, when Caroline finally arrived. She seemed distracted throughout the meal, checking her phone repeatedly, answering Emma's questions with vague platitudes. Robert observed it all with new awareness, recognizing the signs he'd missed for months. After Emma went upstairs to call friends, Caroline lingered at the table, an unusual tension in her posture. "Robert, I need to talk to you." "About the college fund." His direct question caught her off guard. Her eyes widened slightly, the only tell in her carefully composed expression. "You know. I know about the withdrawal. I don't know why." Caroline's gaze flicked toward the stairs, ensuring Emma was out of earshot. "I'm leaving, Robert. I found someone else." Despite his discoveries, hearing the words aloud sent a physical pain through his chest. "Julia?" Another flicker of surprise. "Yes, it wasn't planned, but it's real. I need to live authentically." "Authentically," Robert repeated, the word hollow. "Does authentic living require stealing our daughter's college fund?" "I've contributed to that fund, too," Caroline said, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "And I need resources to start over." Without a word to me, without discussion about Emma's future. "I've left enough in our joint accounts for now." Caroline stood, reaching into her purse to withdraw an envelope. "I've explained everything here. I'll be gone by morning. Julia and I are flying to Florida to look at properties." The envelope landed on the table between them with a finality that seemed to draw all sound from the room. Robert stared at it, unable to reconcile this cold, calculating woman with the partner who had shared his life for 3 decades. "What do I tell Emma?" His voice broke on their daughter's name. "The truth, that I need to find happiness." Caroline hesitated, something like regret crossing her features. "I've never been good at motherhood, Robert. You've always been the better parent. She'll be fine with you." She turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. "I've made coffee for the morning." Force of habit. Then she was gone, footsteps retreating upstairs to pack what remained of her life in their home. Robert sat motionless, staring at the envelope, as tears finally broke through his carefully maintained composure. His shoulders shook with silent sobs, grief and rage warring within him. When Emma's bedroom door opened and her footsteps approached the stairs, he quickly wiped his face, squaring his shoulders. She appeared in the doorway, concern etching her young features. "Dad, what's wrong? I heard Mom go upstairs." Robert looked at his daughter, brilliant, perceptive, innocent, and realized the full weight of what lay ahead. How could he possibly explain that her mother had chosen a new life over her future? "Emma," he began, voice steadier than he felt, "we need to talk." 3 days after Caroline left, Robert sat in a leather chair across from Arthur Klein, his longtime attorney and friend. The office felt too warm, too small, as Arthur reviewed the documents spread across his desk. "I won't sugarcoat this, Bob," Arthur said finally, removing his glasses with a sigh. "Caroline was thorough. The college fund withdrawal was legal. Her name was on the account. Same with the second transfer she made before you froze the accounts." "What about the forged equity line application?" Robert asked, clinging to the hope of some legal recourse. "It never went through, and proving forgery would be your word against hers, unless we get a handwriting expert involved." Arthur leaned forward. "Even then, it's messy. Divorce proceedings rarely favor vindictiveness, no matter how justified." "This isn't about vindictiveness," Robert said, his voice tight. "It's about Emma's future." "I understand. But the courts move slowly, and Caroline's already moved the money offshore." Arthur's expression softened. "I'm sorry, Bob. We can file for divorce, pursue equitable distribution of remaining assets, and establish custody arrangements. But recovering what's already gone—" He shook his head. Robert left the office feeling hollowed out. The bright spring day seemed to mock his internal darkness as he drove aimlessly, unable to face returning home just yet. He found himself at the park where he'd taught Emma to ride a bike, sitting heavily on a bench overlooking the pond. Other parents watched their children play, lives untouched by the kind of betrayal that had shattered his. An elderly couple walked hand in hand along the path, a future he'd thought secure now evaporated. His phone buzzed. A text from Walter. "Checking in. Need anything?" Robert couldn't bring himself to respond. What could he say? That his wife of 30 years had abandoned them, stolen their daughter's future, and left him to pick up the pieces. More messages accumulated. Friends, colleagues, Emma's school counselor requesting a meeting. Robert ignored them all, the weight of failure pressing down on him until it became difficult to breathe. Evening shadows lengthened across the park. He should go home. Emma would be wondering where he was. The thought of his daughter alone in their suddenly empty house finally propelled him to his feet. The house was quiet when he arrived, the silence no longer peaceful but oppressive. "Emma?" he called, setting his keys on the hall table. No answer. Panic flared briefly until he found her note on the refrigerator. "At Sophia's working on science project. Back by 8. Love you, Dad." Alone again, Robert moved through the rooms like a ghost. Caroline's absence was palpable. Spaces where her things had been, shelves half empty, the lingering scent of her perfume now a painful reminder. He paused at Emma's door, noticing it was slightly ajar. He'd been respecting her privacy, giving her space to process her mother's abandonment in her own way. Emma had been surprisingly composed, almost unnaturally so, in the days since Caroline left. Her primary question, about her college fund, had been devastating to answer. "We'll figure something out," he'd promised, the words sounding hollow even to himself. Robert pushed the door open wider, intending only to leave the laundry he'd folded earlier. What he saw stopped him cold. Emma's typically tidy room had been transformed. Papers covered her desk and were taped to her walls. Printouts of bank statements, emails, property listings. Her laptop was open to what appeared to be a code terminal. Sticky notes in her neat handwriting created a timeline spanning her bulletin board. Moving closer, disbelief growing, Robert examined the papers. They were records of Caroline's activities. Hotel reservations, flight bookings, email exchanges with someone named Julia Santos. How had Emma accessed these? His eye caught a particular document, a spreadsheet tracking multiple bank accounts, some with names he didn't recognize. At the top, in bold letters, Mom's identity theft victims. The floor seemed to shift beneath Robert's feet. His 12-year-old daughter had been investigating her mother, uncovering what appeared to be a pattern of criminal activity extending far beyond their family. A notification pinged on Emma's laptop. Automatically, Robert glanced at the screen. An email preview appeared. Emma, I've confirmed the IP addresses match. Your mother has been using these identities for at least 8 months. We should contact. The front door opened and closed. Dad, are you home? Robert stood frozen in Emma's doorway, tears streaming down his face as his daughter's footsteps approached. How had he failed so completely to protect her? While he'd been wallowing in grief, Emma had been carrying a burden no child should bear. She appeared at the end of the hallway, stopping when she saw him in her doorway. Her expression shifted from surprise to resignation. I guess we need to talk, Emma said, her voice steadier than any 12-year-old should be in such circumstances. Robert stared at his daughter, seeing her truly for the first time since Caroline left, not as a victim to be protected, but as a formidable ally he'd underestimated. Emma, he whispered, what have you done? Has betrayal left you feeling like you've failed those who depend on you? Like if you've hit rock bottom, comment your moment of truth and follow to see how Robert finds strength through his daughter's unexpected courage. I didn't do anything wrong, Emma said, her chin lifting slightly. The gesture reminded Robert painfully of Caroline. I just found the truth. They sat at the kitchen table, the evidence from Emma's room spread between them. Robert had made hot chocolate, a childhood comfort that now seemed absurdly inadequate for the conversation they were having. Emma, this is... Robert struggled to find the right words. This isn't something you should have to deal with. You're 12. I'm also the one who first noticed something was wrong, Emma replied calmly. Mom changed her passwords 2 months ago. She never changes passwords. Robert felt a fresh wave of shame. His own daughter, applying lessons he'd taught her about digital security, had seen warning signs he'd missed. How did you get access to her accounts? He asked, professional curiosity momentarily overriding his distress. Emma's expression turned sheepish. Remember when you showed me how to set up 2-factor authentication on my school account? Mom was using her fingerprint for everything. I kind of used her phone while she was sleeping. A surge of contradictory emotions flooded Robert. Pride at his daughter's ingenuity, horror at the invasion of privacy, and profound sadness that she'd felt compelled to investigate her own mother. When I saw the money moving, I started digging deeper, Emma continued. That's when I found the other accounts, and Julia. She pulled a particular printout forward. Julia Santos. She works at the community center where Mom volunteers, but she's not who she says she is. Robert examined the document. A background report showing Julia Santos had previous identities and a pattern of moving every few years. Mom's not her first. Emma hesitated, searching for the right word. Target, Robert supplied quietly. Emma nodded. There are at least 3 others I've found, older women with assets. Julia gets close to them, gains their trust, and then they liquidate their accounts and disappear, Robert finished, the familiar pattern of romance scams clicking into place. Only Caroline wasn't just a victim, she was a willing participant. Why didn't you tell me what you'd found? Robert asked, his voice catching. Emma's eyes dropped to her hot chocolate. At first, I wasn't sure. Then, you were so sad, Dad. I didn't want to make it worse. The simple explanation broke something in Robert. While he'd been drowning in self-pity, his daughter had been shouldering an impossible burden alone. He reached across the table and took her hand. I'm the parent, Emma. It's my job to handle these things, not yours. But you taught me everything I needed to find this stuff, she countered. Your security lectures weren't boring after all. Despite everything, Robert found himself smiling. How many times had Emma rolled her eyes when he explained the importance of strong passwords or the dangers of public Wi-Fi? So what do we do now? Emma asked, suddenly sounding her age again. The question pulled Robert back from the edge of despair. We, not him alone, but them together. His daughter was looking at him with expectation, with trust that he would find a solution. For the first time since discovering Caroline's betrayal, Robert felt a spark of his old confidence returning. He was an expert in security and fraud. This was, in a twisted way, his professional territory. First, we organize what you found, he said, slipping into the methodical tone he'd used with junior analysts during his career. Then we determine if there's enough evidence to involve the authorities. Emma nodded eagerly. I've already started a timeline and evidence log. She pulled her notebook forward, revealing pages of meticulous notes. When did you have time to do all this? Robert asked, amazed. I haven't been sleeping much, Emma admitted. And I skipped PE twice this week. Robert should have been concerned about her missing classes, but found himself suppressing inappropriate laughter instead. The absurdity of their situation, a father and daughter investigating the wife and mother who had betrayed them, struck him suddenly. We need help, he decided. Professional help. Like the police? Emma asked. Eventually. But first, I think we need someone who understands financial crimes. Robert pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts he hadn't used since retirement. And I know just the person. As he placed the call, Robert watched Emma organizing her evidence with practiced efficiency. His daughter, brilliant, resilient, determined. She had inherited his analytical mind and problem-solving skills, not Caroline's talent for deception. For the first time in days, Robert felt something beyond grief and rage, a sense of purpose, a path forward. Walter, it's Robert Wilson. I need your expertise. He paused, meeting Emma's eyes across the table. Yes, it's about Caroline, but it's much bigger than I initially thought. As he explained the situation to his neighbor, who, it turned out, was a retired financial investigator, Robert felt the weight on his chest beginning to lift. They had work to do, evidence to compile, a future to reclaim. And somehow, impossibly, he had his 12-year-old daughter to thank for showing him the way. Trust shattered. Comment your moment of fighting back. Like for courage, follow for justice. Will Robert and Emma's plan succeed against calculated betrayal? 2 weeks of intensive investigation had transformed the Wilson dining room into an operations center. Laptops, documents, and whiteboards covered every surface. Robert's security credentials hung around his neck again, a physical reminder of his return to professional focus. You're sure about this timeline? Walter asked, reviewing Emma's meticulous notes. The retired financial investigator had become their most valuable ally, bringing decades of experience and connections to their cause. Positive, Emma replied. Mom and Julia have a closing scheduled for the Florida condo next Tuesday. They're using the college fund money as down payment. Robert studied the property listing, a luxury beachfront condominium in Naples, priced well above what Caroline should have been able to afford, even with Emma's stolen college fund. The money trail is clear, Walter confirmed, tapping a spreadsheet. Caroline's offshore account received transfers from 3 other victims besides your family. Classic affinity fraud. Julia targeted women at the community center, gained their trust, then introduced Caroline as a successful investor. While Caroline used her respectable reputation to convince them to hand over their savings, Robert finished. The betrayal had evolved from personal to predatory, his wife not just leaving him, but actively participating in defrauding vulnerable people. My contact at the FBI is interested, Walter said. Especially with the interstate nature of the transactions and the pattern of previous victims we've uncovered. When can we meet with them? Robert asked, straightening his tie. He'd started dressing professionally again, another step in reclaiming his identity beyond betrayed husband. Tomorrow morning, Special Agent Ramirez will meet us at the field office downtown. Walter gathered specific documents into a folder. She was particularly interested in Emma's digital evidence. Robert glanced at his daughter, who was coding something on her laptop, earbuds in and forehead furrowed in concentration. Pride mingled with concern. Emma's technical skills had proven invaluable, but the past 2 weeks had thrust her into an adult world of criminal investigation she shouldn't have had to navigate. As if sensing his gaze, Emma looked up and removed an earbud. I've compiled all the login records showing Mom's IP addresses accessing victims' accounts. The pattern is consistent with her work schedule at the community center. That's excellent work, Robert said, marveling again at her resilience. Emma shrugged, but he caught the small smile of pride. I just applied what you taught me about digital footprints. Walter's phone buzzed. He checked the message, eyebrows rising. My contact at the property management company confirms Julia and Caroline are arriving Monday to inspect the condo before closing. They're using the name Santos Wilson for the purchase. The hyphenated name hit Robert like a physical blow. Caroline was literally trying to build a new life and identity with his family name attached to her crimes. Are we ready for this? He asked quietly after Emma had returned to her coding. Walter clasped his shoulder. You've built an airtight case, Bob. The FBI doesn't take meetings for weak evidence. Between Emma's digital trail, the victim statements we've collected, and the financial documentation, they have more than enough to act. Robert nodded, but uncertainty lingered. What if it's not enough? What if they manage to close on the property before? One step at a time, Walter interrupted gently. That's what you always told me when I was panicking about retirement investments, remember? Robert managed a small smile. Yes, he'd been the voice of steady reason for many friends over the years. Somehow, he needed to reclaim that part of himself now. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. That'll be Martha, Walter said. She's bringing dinner. Martha Hoffman, 72 and recently widowed, had lost $30,000 to Caroline and Julia's investment scheme. When Robert and Walter approached her with evidence of the fraud, her initial disbelief had turned to determined anger. She'd become part of their improvised team, helping to contact other victims and providing crucial testimony. As they gathered around the kitchen island, eating Martha's homemade lasagna, Robert was struck by the unlikely alliance they'd formed. A retired security consultant, a financial investigator, a senior victim of fraud, and a 12-year-old coding prodigy, united by betrayal, driven by justice. Tomorrow's the big day, Martha said, passing garlic bread. Are you nervous, Emma? Emma considered the question seriously. A little. But mostly, I want Mom to understand what she did wrong. The simple statement hung in the air. Robert caught Martha and Walter exchanging glances. They all recognized the childlike hope behind Emma's words. that somehow, confronted with her crimes, Caroline would express remorse. Robert wasn't sure he still believed in that possibility. Later, after their guests had left and Emma had finally been persuaded to sleep, Robert stood in the doorway of his daughter's room. The investigation materials were temporarily cleared away, revealing glimpses of the normal childhood beneath. Stuffed animals, science fair ribbons, favorite books. Tomorrow, they would present their case to the FBI. Next week, if all went according to plan, Caroline and Julia would face consequences for their actions. The money might even be recovered, but some losses couldn't be recovered. Emma's innocence, his trust, the family they'd been. As he quietly closed her door, Robert made a silent promise to his sleeping daughter. Whatever happened with Caroline, whatever challenges lay ahead, Emma would never again bear adult burdens alone. He would be the father she deserved, present, protective, and strong. For the first time since Caroline's betrayal, Robert felt ready to face whatever came next. The federal building lobby echoed with their footsteps as Robert, Emma, and Walter approached the security checkpoint. Robert placed a reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder, feeling her tension. "Remember, you only have to walk them through the digital evidence you found," he said quietly. "Agent Ramirez will handle the rest." Emma nodded, clutching her laptop case. She looked both younger and older than her 12 years in her pressed blouse and neat ponytail, a child dressed for an adult occasion. Special Agent Maria Ramirez met them on the 11th floor, her handshake firm and her expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Wilson, Emma, thank you for coming in." She nodded to Walter. "Mr. Gaines, good to see you again." The conference room was intimidating. Large table, city views, and 3 additional agents waiting with notepads. Robert felt Emma press slightly closer to his side. "Before we begin," Agent Ramirez said, "I want you to know we take these allegations very seriously. Financial fraud targeting seniors is a priority for our office, especially with the interstate elements involved." For the next 2 hours, they presented their evidence. Walter outlined the financial transactions and victim patterns. Robert explained Caroline's access to personal information through her volunteer work, and Emma, gaining confidence as she spoke, walked the agents through the digital trail she'd uncovered. "You're certain about these IP addresses?" one agent asked Emma. "Yes, sir. My mom always uses the same password patterns, and she never logs out of her accounts properly. I was able to access her browser history and confirm the connection between her accounts and the victim's compromised information." The agents exchanged impressed glances. One made a note. "Based on what you've provided," Agent Ramirez said when they'd finished, "we have sufficient cause to open a formal investigation. We'll need official statements from each of you, and we'll be contacting the victims you've identified." "What about the property closing?" Robert asked. "It's scheduled for Tuesday." "We'll be monitoring that situation closely," she replied, her tone suggesting more than her words conveyed. "Miss Santos and Miss Wilson will not be completing that transaction." Relief washed over Robert. After weeks of helplessness, things were finally moving forward. As they prepared to leave, Agent Ramirez pulled Robert aside. "Your daughter is remarkable," she said quietly. Not many adults could have compiled such thorough evidence, let alone a 12-year-old. Pride swelled in Robert's chest. "She's resilient. She'll need to be. These cases can take time, Mr. Wilson. And they can be messy when family is involved." "We understand," Robert replied, though he wasn't sure Emma truly could. The weekend passed in a strange limbo of waiting. Emma returned to some semblance of normal life, homework, video calls with friends, even a movie night with Robert, where they didn't discuss Caroline once. It was almost possible to pretend they were simply adjusting to a new family structure like any of Emma's friends with divorced parents. Almost. Monday morning, Robert's phone rang. Agent Ramirez's number. "They've arrived in Florida," she said without preamble. "Our team has them under surveillance. The plan is to make the arrest tomorrow at the closing, when all parties are present and the intent to commit fraud is clear." "Do you need us to do anything?" Robert asked. "No, stay where you are. I'll call you when it's done." The waiting was excruciating. Robert found himself checking his phone every few minutes, unable to focus on anything else. Emma, sensing his anxiety, stayed close, the two of them moving through the day in a state of suspended animation. Tuesday morning dawned bright and clear. Robert made breakfast, packed Emma's lunch, and drove her to school as if it were any normal day. They didn't discuss what might be happening in Florida. At 11:42 a.m., his phone rang. "It's done," Agent Ramirez said. "We've arrested Julia Santos and Caroline Wilson on multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. They're in custody." Robert sat heavily in his office chair, emotions too complex to name washing over him. How did they react? Ms. Santos attempted to flee. Ms. Wilson seemed shocked, as if she hadn't expected consequences. A pause. She asked about Emma. Robert's throat tightened. "What happens now?" "They'll be processed here and transferred back to your jurisdiction for arraignment. The prosecutor will contact you about making statements, and Mr. At Wilson, we've already begun the process of freezing assets and recovering funds." After hanging up, Robert sat motionless, the finality of it all sinking in. His wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, was under arrest. The mother of his child was facing federal charges. The reality was both vindicating and devastating. He picked Emma up from school himself, waiting until they were home to share the news. "They arrested Mom?" Emma's voice was small, younger suddenly than it had been in weeks. "Yes, Agent Ramirez said they have everything they need to make the charges stick." Emma nodded slowly, processing. "Will she go to jail?" "Probably, yes, for a while at least." "And will we get my college money back?" "They're working on recovering all the stolen funds." "It might take some time." Emma was quiet for a long moment, then asked the question Robert had been dreading. "Can I see her?" The request squeezed his heart. Despite everything, despite her remarkable strength and maturity through this ordeal, Emma was still a child who missed her mother. "We'll talk to Agent Ramirez about what's possible," he promised, pulling her into a hug. "But Emma, you need to understand. Your mom made choices that have serious consequences. This isn't something that will just go away." "I know," she whispered against his shirt. "I just want to ask her why." Robert held his daughter tighter, wishing he had an answer that would make sense to her. Why would a mother steal her child's future? Why would a wife of 30 years betray her family? Why would a respected community volunteer prey on vulnerable seniors? There were no answers that would satisfy. Only the complicated truth that people sometimes made devastating choices and others were left to rebuild from the wreckage. Later that evening, Walter and Martha came over with takeout and cautious celebration. The small group that had become their support system raised glasses of sparkling cider in a somber toast. "To justice," Walter said. "To new beginnings," Martha added. "To the truth," Emma offered quietly. Robert looked at the three faces around his kitchen island, allies who had stood with them when everything fell apart. "To finding strength where you least expect it," he said, his eyes meeting Emma's. The future remained uncertain, with legal proceedings and emotional healing still ahead. But for the first time since discovering Caroline's betrayal, Robert felt something like peace. They had faced the worst together. They would rebuild together, too. 3 months passed in a blur of legal meetings, counseling sessions, and gradual healing. Spring blossomed into summer, bringing longer days and a fragile sense of normalcy to the Wilson household. Robert stood in the kitchen, coffee in hand, watching through the window as Emma tapped away at her laptop on the back porch. Her college fund had been fully restored. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had frozen Caroline and Julia's assets immediately, recovering most of the stolen money. The other victims, too, had seen their savings returned, a rare happy ending in cases of financial fraud. The divorce was proceeding without contest. Caroline, facing multiple federal charges, had signed everything Robert's attorney put in front of her. Full custody of Emma, the house, fair division of their remaining assets. It was as if, caught in her deception, she'd surrendered all claims to her former life. Emma had visited her mother once, at the detention center. Robert had waited anxiously in the visitors' area, watching through glass as his daughter sat across from Caroline. The conversation lasted only 15 minutes. Emma returned with red-rimmed eyes, but a straight spine. She said she was sorry, Emma reported on the drive home, but she mostly talked about herself, how she felt trapped, how Julia made her feel alive. A pause. She didn't really ask about me. Robert had merely nodded, unsure what comfort he could possibly offer. Today marked a new chapter. Walter's knock at the front door signaled his arrival right on schedule. "Ready for the big reveal?" the older man asked, following Robert to the back porch. Emma looked up, a smile breaking across her face. "Is it finished?" Walter handed her a small paper bag. "See for yourself." Inside were business cards, sleek and professional. Emma withdrew one reverently, reading aloud. "Wilson Security Consulting, Digital Protection for a Vulnerable World." "The website goes live tonight," Walter said, "and I've already lined up 3 potential clients who were impressed by your presentation at the senior center last week." Robert felt a surge of pride. The idea had started as a way to channel Emma's technical skills toward something productive during the difficult summer. The fraud prevention workshops she'd developed for seniors had quickly become popular at the community center, the same place where Caroline and Julia had found their victims. What began as a healing project had evolved into something more, a genuine business opportunity. With Robert's security background and Emma's digital expertise, they offered a unique service to an underserved market. Walter, with his financial investigation experience, had become their first official partner. "There's something else," Robert said, pulling out his own surprise, a folded newspaper. He handed it to Emma, who scanned the article with widening eyes. "Local father-daughter team pioneers senior cyber protection," she read, voice rising with excitement. "Dad, we're in the paper." "Reporter called yesterday after the workshop. I wanted it to be a surprise." Emma beamed, the simple joy on her face, a sight Robert had once feared he might never see again. The trauma of Caroline's betrayal would never fully disappear, but it no longer defined every moment of their lives. Martha arrived next, carrying her famous lemonade and a stack of files. "The Henderson case," she announced, setting them on the porch table. "Classic romance scam attempt. I caught it before she transferred any money." Martha had become their client liaison, her personal experience making her uniquely qualified to connect with seniors facing similar threats. Her kitchen table network of widows and retirees had become both client base and early warning system for potential scams. As the small team reviewed their upcoming projects, Robert marveled at the unlikely business they'd created from the ashes of betrayal. They were helping others while helping themselves heal, finding purpose in preventing what they couldn't undo. Later, after Walter and Martha had left, Robert and Emma sat on the porch swing in comfortable silence. Fireflies blinked in the gathering dusk, a simple summer pleasure that seemed more precious now. "Dad?" Emma's voice was thoughtful. "Do you think we would have started the business if Mom hadn't left?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "Probably not." Emma nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that a lot. How something really bad led to something not bad." "That happens sometimes," Robert said. "It doesn't make the bad thing okay, but it means we get to choose what comes next." "I like what we chose," Emma said, leaning against his shoulder. Robert put his arm around his daughter, feeling a deep sense of gratitude despite everything they'd lost. Caroline's betrayal had taken much from them, but it had also revealed strengths they might never have discovered otherwise. Emma's resilience, his ability to rebuild, their unbreakable bond. The pending court case against Caroline and Julia would bring more challenges. Emma would face more difficult emotions as she grew. There would be days when the absence of what should have been a complete family would sting sharply. But sitting on the porch with his remarkable daughter, watching fireflies rise from the summer grass, Robert felt something he'd once thought permanently lost: hope. Not for the life they'd planned before, that was gone, but for something new and unexpectedly meaningful. "We should add a blog to the website," Emma said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I could write about the latest scams we're seeing. Help more people." "That's a great idea," Robert replied, smiling at her enthusiasm. "We could co-write it." As they began brainstorming, ideas flowing easily between them, Robert recognized the greatest lesson from their ordeal. Betrayal might break what was, but it didn't determine what could be. The future they were building now, different, unexpected, but entirely theirs, was proof of that. You know that moment, don't you? Sitting alone at your kitchen table, staring at evidence of betrayal while the world keeps turning outside your window. The coffee grows cold, forgotten like the promises once made. We've all felt that first tear fall, the one that breaks the dam, that turns certainty into quicksand beneath our feet. Robert's struggle might mirror something you've faced, or perhaps something you've witnessed in a friend or loved one. That initial shock when trust shatters doesn't discriminate by age, but it sure hits differently when you've invested decades of your life. There's something particularly cruel about betrayal in our golden years, isn't there? After decades of building something, a marriage, a family, a legacy, to watch it crumble feels like losing not just your present, but your past as well. Those photo albums gather dust differently. That porch swing creaks with memories that sting rather than soothe. The carefully maintained home becomes both sanctuary and prison, filled with echoes of what was and painful reminders of what isn't anymore. That's the deeper cut for folks like us, when betrayal doesn't just take what lies ahead, but seems to rewrite what came before. The worst part might be that voice whispering, maybe you should have known better. Maybe all those years of wisdom somehow failed you when it mattered most. It's that fleeting doubt in your own judgment that can keep you up at night, staring at shadows on the ceiling fan as it turns, like the questions in your mind. Did I miss the signs? Was I a fool all along? These questions sting with particular venom when you've prided yourself on the wisdom that comes with experience. Yet remember how Robert found his way forward. not by denying his pain or pretending the betrayal didn't cut deep, not by trying to reclaim exactly what was lost. Instead, he discovered what many of us learn through life's hardest lessons, that resilience isn't about bouncing back to who you were before, but growing into someone new, someone who carries the scars with dignity. Like Robert, you might find that the same life experience that makes betrayal cut deeper also provides the tools to rebuild. You've weathered storms before. You know which foundations matter when the decorative facades are stripped away. You've learned, sometimes the hard way, how to distinguish between what feels good in the moment and what sustains you through difficult seasons. And isn't it something how often help comes from unexpected quarters? Robert found strength in his daughter Emma, in neighbor Walter, in new purpose born from pain. Sometimes it's the people we least expect, a grandchild, an old friend who shows up without being asked, even a stranger, who help us find our footing again. There's wisdom in recognizing these lifelines when they appear, in accepting help without shame. I won't pretend there's a neat silver lining to heartbreak. Some tears need to be shed. Some grief demands its due. The coffee still tastes bitter some mornings. Certain songs on the radio still catch you off guard with memories. Holidays carry echoes of absence. But here's what I've noticed about folks our age. We understand that endings make way for beginnings. We've lived long enough to see how the worst chapter of a story isn't necessarily the last one. The morning comes when you sit on that same porch swing and realize the creaking sounds more like music than mourning. You find yourself planning again, dreaming again, perhaps in ways you never would have imagined before. Different, unexpected, but entirely yours. This resilience isn't despite our years, but because of them. Each line on our faces earned through surviving storms that once seemed insurmountable. The coffee brews fresh, warm between your hands, and tomorrow still comes, bringing with it the chance to write what happens next.